Beneath the ocean's serene surface lies a darker realm of danger. Sharks silently prowl, and jellyfish sting without warning, proving that even the sea's most beautiful creatures can be deadly. These rare, unprovoked encounters remind us of the ocean's untamed power, where humans are mere visitors in a world ruled by marine life's wonders and threats. Discover 6 gripping tales of survival and vulnerability. The year was 2012, and the great white shark capital had long been attributed to Gansbaai, a small fishing town on South Africa's south coast. This region of the Atlantic was well known for having a large population of great white sharks nestled between the rocky cliffs of the Danger Point Peninsula and the deep waters of Shark Alley. Carrying a few tourists and an experienced crew, the Steel Horizon boat sailed early one morning from Gansbaai Harbor. With great anticipation, the group of explorers wanted to get a close-up look at great white sharks and feel the adrenaline rush. One of the travelers was Draven Eldridge, 38, a New York accountant finally taking a much-needed vacation. 3 other divers accompanied him: Australian backpacker Victor Hensley, who enjoyed extreme sports, Polish photojournalist Ria Kowalski, and UK travel blogger Sybil Marlowe. All the crew members were convinced that the dive would be completely safe, especially Captain Gideon Pike, a burly, sunburned man with decades of experience navigating South Africa's shark-infested waters. A cage in the boat was built with thick steel bars to withstand the force of most giant sharks. Before the ship arrived at the dive site, which was popular with great white sharks because so many seals live nearby on the islands, the tourists received a quick safety briefing. The water was murky and cold, like a South African winter. After the divers were outfitted, the team started chumming the water, discarding fish organs and blood to draw sharks. The water's surface started to ripple in minutes, and hazy shadows were visible, moving beneath the waves. One of the crew members pointed to the dark shape that was getting closer. It was a huge, great white, over 15 feet long. As the predator circled idly, its dorsal fins slicing through the water like a knife, the tourists gathered at the boat's edge, staring in wonder. Without any delay, Captain Pike and his team lowered the cage into the water. The 4 divers, including Draven, were excited as they climbed in. The cold Atlantic water engulfed their bodies as they dropped into the cage, and they could barely see a few feet ahead. The shark circled the boat, moving slowly and deliberately as though assessing the unusual metal device recently entering its territory. Nothing occurred for a few tense minutes. The divers held fast to the cage bars as they peered through the murky water to catch a better glimpse of the fantastic animal. The shark then abruptly turned and lunged straight toward the cage bars. The enormous head of the creature violently vibrated through the structure as it collided with the metal bars. Victor, one of the divers, slammed into the cage wall after losing his hold due to the sudden and powerful impact. Ria almost dropped her waterproof camera in shock while trying to record the moment. The shark briefly withdrew, only to reappear and strike even more forcefully. The force of the second charge bent one of the bars inward, leaving a tiny opening at the cage's side. The shark crashed into the cage again before anyone could react, shattering some thinned metal. Now that the cage was breached, Draven, positioned close to the damaged section, was thrown into the open sea during the confusion. The divers and the crews above deck panicked. Draven was floating only a few feet away from the shark, confused and trying to get his bearings. Seeing its chance, the great white focused on him. Its soulless black eyes found their target, and then it sprang forward with terrifying speed, its jaws agape. Captain Pike gave commands from the boat, his voice hardly audible over the mayhem. A rescue line was deployed as the crew hurried to pull the cage back up. Yet time was not on their side. With terrifying speed, the shark closed the distance, its massive body slicing through the water like a torpedo. Draven hardly had time to respond. The massive shark's teeth sank into his legs, slicing through his flesh and wetsuit like butter. He screamed incoherently, his mouth leaking bubbles as the pain raced through his body. The shark thrashed violently, shaking Draven like a rag doll as blood clouded the water. Frying with fury, the crew hauled Draven out of the water in seconds, though it seemed like an eternity. He was alive for the time being despite having a severely broken leg. Disappointed at losing its meal, the shark thrashed in the water below, sending waves smashing into the boat with its strong tail. Draven was helped onto the deck by Victor, who was closest to him at the time of the attack. His breathing was shallow, his face was pale, and blood was oozing from his leg. While one of the crew radioed for emergency assistance, Captain Pike quickly used a makeshift tourniquet to stop the bleeding. There was no sign of the shark leaving as it circled beneath the boat. It made a few more small bumps against the hull to mock the people above before vanishing into thin air. Draven was taken to the closest hospital by ambulance, waiting for him at Gansby Harbor as the boat promptly returned there. Despite his dire circumstances, he managed to survive the attack. The doctors who later treated him said that the situation would have been much worse had the crew taken even a few more seconds to pull him out of the water. Draven's life was irrevocably altered in the wake of the event. He spent months recovering from numerous surgeries and didn't fully regain use of his leg. But after the attack, he greatly respected the ocean and its creatures. Though terrifying, the experience was humbling, as he would later tell friends and family. He had survived to tell the story after coming into direct contact with one of nature's most formidable predators, which reminded him that great white sharks are amazing animals, but should also be feared. In the early summer of 2008, seasoned divers Caleb Thornley and Rourke Fenwick embarked on a journey to Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, aiming to explore the renowned Ras Mohammed National Park. Situated at the southern tip of the peninsula in the Red Sea, Ras Mohammed boasts miles of vibrant coral reefs, delicate sea anemones, and a kaleidoscope of vividly colored fish. This underwater paradise promised a diving experience unlike any other. Caleb and Rourke embarked on a mission to document the lesser-known species inhabiting the deeper, shadowy parts of the reef, particularly the elusive nocturnal predators often missed during routine day dives. Equipped with high-resolution underwater cameras and extended-duration oxygen tanks, the seasoned divers felt excited and at ease as they entered the water, ready to capture the hidden wonders of the reef that surface divers rarely see. As they descended, the sunlight gradually dimmed, filtering through the water in soft beams that bathed the reef in an ethereal glow. Caleb and Rourke expertly navigated through the maze of corals and swaying sea fans, surrounded by vibrant schools of fish darting around them. Caleb, the more experienced diver, led the way, occasionally signaling Rourke to capture the moment as a manta ray glided by or when they spotted a rare sea sponge. As they descended, Caleb saw an odd movement at the foot of a big coral formation. Something large appeared in a narrow, barely noticeable crevice, unless one knew where to look. Apprehensive, he gestured for Rourke to wait while he looked into it. Accustomed to Caleb's inquisitiveness, Rourke nodded and remained at a distance, putting his camera in high definition to record whatever might appear from the dark opening. Glancing between two enormous coral outcroppings, Caleb approached the crack with caution. He could make out the faint outline of a thick, curved body waiting tightly coiled. It was instantly apparent to him that the diver's presence probably agitated a moray eel. Though Caleb thought he could watch them without disturbing them, these eels became aggressive when cornered or provoked. With his fingers gripping the edge of the coral for balance, he inched closer to get a closer look. The eel attacked abruptly and without warning. With a body nearly 6 feet long, the green giant moray bounded out of the crack at a terrifying speed. Its wide, gaping mouth exposed the eel's razor-sharp teeth, and before Caleb could respond, it had clamped down on his arm. As soon as its fangs penetrated his wetsuit and pricked his skin like needles, he felt an instantaneous excruciating pain. Though instinct made Caleb jerk back, the eels held firm. Its powerful body twisted and flailed in the cramped area, sinking its fangs farther into Caleb's forearm. The pure blue sea surrounding them started to turn red as blood began to splatter across it. Caleb's breathing accelerated, his heart raced, and he felt his oxygen tank running out sooner than he thought. He struggled mightily, but the eel persisted. Its strong jaw clamped down on his arm like a vice, causing panic. Remaining motionless for a brief moment due to shock, Rourke observed the scene from a close distance. Though he had witnessed hostile morays, he had never encountered one this size or one that struck so viciously. He was aware of Caleb's dire situation. Not only did the blood in the water indicate that they were both hurt, but it also warned of impending danger. He swam rapidly in Caleb's direction, But the situation was worse than he had imagined. With his eyesight beginning to cloud due to the pain and lack of oxygen, Caleb found it challenging to maintain his calm. Though he was aware that panicking would only make things worse, the excruciating pain in his arm made it difficult for him to focus. Every attempt by the eel to break free only made it tighten its grip. Minutes earlier, his oxygen gauge had been safely in the green zone. Now it was dangerously close to the red zone. The clock was ticking. With grim determination, Rourke, now at his side, assessed the situation. He knew that prying the eel off with his bare hands was pointless. The moray's jaws had an infamously strong bite that was difficult to release. They had a knife in case of emergency, but it was dangerous to use it close to the eel's head. If Caleb made a mistake, the creature could become even more agitated or cause irreversible damage. Rourke noticed time was running out, and Caleb's movements had slowed significantly. Panic set in as he realized he was losing sight of his friend. Faced with a critical decision, Rourke focused on the writhing eel entangled with Caleb. Desperately, he reached for the emergency knife strapped to Caleb's leg, determined to act quickly and free his friend from the deadly predicament. He paused for a split second before severing the blade and stabbing the eel in the side, aiming for the area directly behind its gills. The eel reacted instantly as the knife plunged deeply, thrashing around and severing its hold on Caleb's arm. The eel did not bite him, so Caleb fell backward and held his hurt arm. Though his wounds were still leaking blood, he was no longer bound. Knowing they had just a few minutes before Caleb's oxygen ran out completely, Rourke grabbed him by the shoulder and started swimming toward the surface. Aware of the dangers of ascending too rapidly from such depths, they carefully but urgently began their ascent. Their hearts raced, and their lungs burned as they fought to control their pace. Finally, gasping for air, both men broke the surface, exhausted but relieved to be alive. After seeing them, the anchored boat moved swiftly to get close. After noticing the blood in the water, the crew hoisted the two men aboard. The onboard doctor cared for Caleb, whose arm was still gushing blood. No major arteries had been severed despite the depth of the wound. Although the attack would leave scars on his arm for the rest of his life, Caleb would recover. Beside him sat Rourke, still trembling from the ordeal. The two men exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Though they had made it through, the experience had altered them. Although Caleb's arm healed gradually in the days that followed, the attack's psychological effects persisted. Even though he and Rourke kept diving, they never returned to Ras Mohammed's deeper areas. They had learned a valuable lesson about the unpredictable nature of the ocean and its inhabitants from the moray's aggressiveness. Stories of the near-fatal encounter with the moray eel that nearly claimed Caleb's arm would be recounted for years. Caleb often wrapped up the tale with a lighthearted joke, quipping that the eel simply didn't appreciate having its picture taken. Yet beneath the humor lay a deep respect for the ocean's dangerous beauty and the formidable creatures that call it home. Fishing enthusiasts were lowering their nets into the East Alligator River, known for its dense crocodile population and hazardous waters in the remote Northern Territory of Australia. The wet season had just ended in 2011, leaving the river muddy and swollen, ideal conditions for the saltwater crocodiles that lurked around and preyed on humans. Arriving at first light, some fishermen hoped to capture barramundi, a highly sought-after fish in that region. 3 men made up the group: Teague McAllister, an experienced fisherman in his mid-40s, Harlan O'Donnell, a younger, more daring man in his 30s, and Fergus Ferg Calloway, a young man just starting in the trade who was eager to establish himself. The 3 passed the morning by silencing their nets and retrieving small catches. The sun was beating down on the river's surface, reflecting off the humid air. Everything appeared normal. Although Teague, the most seasoned member of the group, had cautioned them to remain near the boat, they became more daring. They ventured into the shallow waters thinking the crocodiles were in the dark depths or far downstream. As the hours passed, the fish remained elusive. The incident occurred at approximately noon. Ever the risk-taker, Harlan O'Donnell decided to go a little further from the boat and dragged the net behind him while knee-deep in the muddy water. Teague had remained in the ship, keeping a wary eye on the 2 younger men while Ferg stood close by, attempting to imitate Harlan's approach. However, something was observing them from below. Before Harlan knew it, a huge saltwater crocodile over 1,000 kilograms in weight and easily 15 feet long had been hiding in the river's lower depths. It had been watching the men for some time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The muddy and opaque water concealed its approach. One moment, Harlan was waist-deep in the river, pulling his net through the water. The next, a thunderous splash broke the silence. Upon hearing the sound, Teague quickly turned his head, but it was too late. Grasping Harlan's leg with its enormous fangs, the crocodile leaped out of the water with horrifying velocity. He was pulled beneath the surface before he could even scream. Teague froze momentarily, his brain straining to understand what he saw. Ferg was stunned to the point of paralysis on the shore, his face devoid of color. The crocodile did its famous death roll, spinning Harlan's body so violently that it attempted to rip flesh from the bone, causing the water surrounding him to churn violently. Teague was aware that they were short on time to take action. After submerging their victim in deeper waters where they were unable to escape, crocodiles would drown them instead of killing them right away. In minutes, if they didn't take immediate action, Harlan would be dead. The boat was empty of any weaponry, including spears and guns. With his mind spinning to find a solution, Teague muttered curses at himself. The only object he could reach was a long wooden bar, which he grabbed before diving into the water. Ferg, unflinching in fear, observed Teague leaping into the turbulent water and violently slamming the oar at the crocodile's powerful physique. After the initial few blows, nothing appeared to happen. Steadying its deadly momentum, the crocodile pulled Harlan further down its mouth. Now barely above the water, Teague could see Harlan's face, his mouth struggling for air and his eyes wide with fear. The surrounding water became hazy with blood. Teague realized his target must be the crocodile's eyes, the enormous creature's only weak point. He swung the bar again with all his might and touched the crocodile's head. A brief slowdown in the creature's thrashing was insufficient. As the crocodile struggled to drag its prey deeper into the river, Teague could feel the water pulling at him. Breaking out of his stasis, Ferg ran toward the water and grabbed a nearby rope. Ferg threw the rope toward Teague without a second thought and waded into the water. Hearing Teague's strained voice urging him to secure the rope, Ferg immediately tied it around the struggling figure without hesitation. He waded further in, wrapping the rope around Harlan's torso as best he could, carefully avoiding the crocodile's reach. Teague swung the oar again, hitting the crocodile squarely in the left eye. The beast backed away briefly, releasing its hold on Harlan's leg. It was all the time they needed. Holding onto the rope, Ferg pulled as hard as he could while Teague hauled Harlan toward the shore with strength he didn't know he possessed. Furious at the attack, the crocodile lunged again, missing its intended target. After Teague and Ferg hauled Harlan out of the water, he collapsed onto the muddy bank, drenched in blood and sweat and panting. Before it retreated into the dark waters, the crocodile watched them with its yellow eyes as it briefly lingered at the water's edge. Harlan was barely conscious of his surroundings. With the crocodile's teeth having ripped through flesh and muscle, his leg was mangled, exposing bone in some areas. To stop the bleeding, Teague and Ferg swiftly made a tourniquet out of their shirts and fastened it firmly around Harlan's thigh. They needed to get him to the hospital as soon as possible. With Teague sitting next to Ferg, applying pressure to the wound, they loaded Harlan into the boat. Knowing they were running out of time, the closest clinic was miles away. Although his gait would never change, Harlan miraculously survived the raid. He had to undergo several surgeries on his leg and months of rehabilitation. All three men were physically and psychologically scarred for life by the event. Teague, a fisherman who had previously been bold and self-assured, now approached the river with a fresh awareness of the risks that lay beneath. The Australian bush was no place for bluster, as Ferg, who had once been eager to prove himself, quickly discovered. The crocodile still held sway over the rivers of the Northern Territory, which remained as untamed as before. However, Teague, Ferg, and Harlan would carry the lessons they learned that day for the rest of their lives. It was always a reminder to be cautious and respectful of the surrounding wildlife in crocodile territory. A small group of tourists went snorkeling around the beautiful coral reefs of the Similan Islands in 2013, on Thailand's southern coast. The Similans, an archipelago in the Andaman Sea, were well known for their crystal-clear waters, rich marine biodiversity, and coral gardens. As a protected national park, the islands drew many visitors to the stunning underwater scenery, which had mainly escaped human interference. On this particular day, 6 tourists from Khao Lak boarded a small boat for a seaside adventure. Among them was Bartholomew Bart Vickers, a middle-aged American with a passion for the ocean, but little understanding of its dangers. Beside him sat his younger, more cautious wife Isla, who shared his excitement but was mindful of the risks. Danish siblings Ulrik and Freya Sorensen, eager to explore the waters, also joined the group. Despite being experienced travelers, they had never gone snorkeling in Southeast Asia. 2 New Zealand friends, Tamati Heke and Mele Tawa, completed the group. They were known for always looking for exhilarating things to do. The sun shone brightly overhead after the boat pulled into a remote spot close to the islands. The coral formations were visible above the surface of the crystal-clear water, beckoning the group to jump in with their vibrant hues. Before distributing snorkels and fins, the boat's captain, a local named Preacha, gave them a quick safety briefing. He mentioned coralfish and currents, but didn't mention jellyfish once. The otherworldly beauty beneath them spellbound the group as they entered the water. The water was warm and inviting, and fish of every hue darted between the coral. Isla was swimming a few meters away, keeping close to the surface while closely examining the coral. Bart floated on his back and stared up at the cloudless sky. Tamati and Mele playfully splashed each other close to the boat as Freya and Ulrik ventured farther, their curiosity guiding them toward a larger coral formation. They had no idea that a swarm of box jellyfish had floated into the vicinity. Their long, poisonous tentacles trailed behind them, waiting for anything to brush against them, and their nearly transparent bodies made them almost invisible. Ulrik felt a searing sting across his leg, the first indication that something was wrong. Though he initially believed he had brushed against some coral, the following pain was unheard of. His leg appeared to have caught fire. Gasping for air, he jerked to the surface, his face contorted with pain. Freya swam over to her brother when she saw how distressed he was. She too felt a sting on her arm as she passed through the water, but she didn't understand its source. Panic spread quickly as more swimmers were stung. Bart, floating peacefully, suddenly let out a cry, clutching his side. Isla saw him thrashing and swam over, only to feel a searing pain shoot up her leg. Mele and Tamati, still near the boat, were the last to realize what was happening. They had seen the others in distress, but it wasn't until Tamati felt the sting on his arm that they understood the gravity of the situation. Box jellyfish. The group's once serene snorkeling trip had turned into a nightmare. The pain from the stings was instant and excruciating, but worse than that, the venom was starting to take hold. Ulrik, the first to be stung, was already struggling to stay afloat. His muscles were seizing up and his breathing became labored. Freya, though in pain herself, tried to keep him above the surface, but she too was weakening. The boat captain, Preacha, had seen the disturbance in the waters. His eyes widened in terror when he noticed the telltale symptoms of a box jellyfish swarm. He knew that time was crucial. He swiftly snatched up a long pole and began yelling at the group to swim back to the boat as quickly as possible. With their bodies shaking from the shock of the stings, Mele and Tamati were the first to board the boat and climb onto the deck. After assisting them, Preacha reached for the pole to help Isla, who was pulling Bart toward the ship. Bart's breathing was shallow and his face was pale. The venom was beginning to affect his heart and lungs. Preacha quickly pulled them aboard and used a tiny first aid kit on the boat to apply vinegar to their stings. It was little, but it would stop the poison from spreading. Struggling in the water were Freya and Ulrik. Freya was close to losing consciousness, her vision blurring from the pain. Observing the siblings in distress, Preacha knew he had to act quickly. After he threw them a rope, Preacha and Tamati could pull them onto the boat, and they both succeeded in grabbing it with heroic strength. As soon as everyone was on board, Preacha fired up the engine and sped back toward the shore. Every second was measured. Some tourists writhed in agony, while others were barely conscious as they lay on the deck. The most critical condition belonged to Bart. His pulse was weak and his breathing shallow. Freya was also rapidly fading. The boat reached the shore after what felt like an eternity, where an ambulance was waiting. Preacher had radioed ahead, and the medics quickly rushed the group to the nearest hospital. As the doctors struggled to neutralize the jellyfish venom, Bart and Freya were admitted to intensive care, and their survival was in jeopardy. All of them made it through the ordeal alive, but not before suffering physical and psychological damage. Bart's recovery was sluggish after spending weeks in the hospital. Freya, too, was recovering slowly. Even though the others had it better, they could never forget the suffering or fear they felt that day. Their trip to Thailand was meant to be an adventure, but they unexpectedly encountered one of the ocean's deadliest creatures, the box jellyfish. Although they survived the encounter, they left with a profound respect for the sea's hidden dangers and a reminder of its unspoken perils. The waters surrounding the Gulf of Papagayo shimmered with life in the summer of 2010 off the Pacific coast of Costa Rica. Divers were well aware of the area's rich biodiversity, and in particular the presence of the gentle giants of the ocean, manta rays. Rays, sharks, and dolphins navigated the Gulf's deep waters, known for its warm currents and nutrient-rich waters. Bastian Holcroft and his partner Enzo Falco were two seasoned divers who set up their equipment on the deck of a rented boat on a bright, clear day. Holcroft was an experienced underwater photographer who had traveled the world for years, taking pictures of marine life. He traveled to Costa Rica to take photos of manta rays. For the previous week, he had been working with Falco, a local guide and fellow diver who led dives and ensured Holcroft got the best shots. The aim for the day was straightforward: take pictures of the rays close to a well-known cleaning station where smaller fish remove parasites from the rays. They quickly looked around the gear before descending into the sapphire blue waters. Sunlight filtered through the water as they descended, giving the rocky bottom an odd sheen. Fish schools darted in and out of cracks, and sea turtles occasionally slid by. Carrying a camera, Holcroft plunged forward, peering over the horizon for the distinctive oscillations resembling wings characteristic of a manta ray. They saw one in a matter of minutes. The creature was enormous, with an estimated wingspan of over 20 feet. It moved through the water like a living shadow, gliding through the waves with an almost otherworldly elegance. Holcroft angled himself to get the best possible shot and started taking pictures immediately. Carefully circling it so as not to startle it, he made a mistake in approaching it. He stepped outside of the ray's space by moving too fast. Startled by the diver's unexpected closeness, the massive animal reacted defensively. The ray's typically smooth, rhythmic undulations became more erratic, but Holcroft was too preoccupied with his apparatus to notice slight movement variations. When Falco, who was a few feet away, noticed the shift, he attempted to signal Holcroft, but it was too late. The ray beat its strong wing-like pectoral fins to break free from what it saw as a threat. As he approached it too closely, the creature unexpectedly entangled Holcroft in its underbelly. The manta ray quickly swam away from him after his camera strap became entangled in its rough skin. Against the animal's overwhelming strength, Holcroft was dragged through the water powerless. He became more conscious of his breathing and felt the rays pull as they descended farther. He fought to break free, but it seemed like the strap tightened the more he moved. With only half of his oxygen tank remaining, time was running out. As soon as he realized he was trapped, panic began. From a short distance away, Falco immediately saw the situation's seriousness. Even though he was swimming at their speed, the manta ray outpaced him. He persisted, knowing he was the only one who could save Holcroft's life. Despite being aware that it was pulling a human with it, the ray kept on its frantic descent. The water got colder and darker as they descended farther. Holcroft's body was twisted awkwardly against the force of the ray's movements. He could feel the pressure building in his ears as they went more profound, and his oxygen levels were dropping dangerously low. More and tighter knots formed around his gear the more he tried to untangle himself. At this point, he knew his only hope was Falco. Falco, now closing in, pulled out his dive knife. He swam with every ounce of energy, and his eyes were fixed on Holcroft's tangled form. He knew that if the manta ray dragged Holcroft much deeper, the pressure, combined with the lack of oxygen, would likely kill him. As he approached, he saw Holcroft's wide, fearful, frantic eyes behind his mask. Without wasting any time, Falco grabbed Holcroft's arm and began slicing through the strap wrapped around the camera and Holcroft's gear. Falco almost lost his balance as the manta ray thrashed again, sensing the unexpected resistance. But Falco held steady. With one final cut, the strap came loose and Holcroft was free. The two men, untethered from the massive creature, watched as it disappeared into the darkening depths below them, its enormous wing-like pectoral fins flapping slowly as it retreated. Holcroft, gasping for breath, signaled to Falco that he was okay, though visibly shaken. They immediately began their ascent, careful not to rise too quickly to avoid decompression sickness. Breaking the surface, both men were greeted by the warm, salty air. Holcroft ripped off his mask and gulped down the air, his heart racing. Falco, though exhausted, gave a relieved smile. The boat was nearby, and they quickly swam back, hauling themselves aboard. On the deck, Holcroft sat silently, staring out at the water. He had been diving for over a decade, and nothing like this had happened. Falco, ever the pragmatic one, handed him a bottle of water and patted him on the back, reminding him they had been lucky. If Falco had been further away, the situation could have ended differently. In the following days, Holcroft reviewed the photos he had taken just before the incident. The images of the manta rays were stunning, capturing the grace and beauty of the creature up close. But every time Holcroft looked at them, he couldn't help but remember the sheer terror of being dragged helplessly through the ocean's depths. Though the encounter rattled him, it didn't deter him from diving. However, from that day forward, Holcroft was more cautious and respectful of the boundaries between himself and the creatures he documented. The ocean was vast and mysterious, and he was reminded that even the gentlest of giants could turn dangerous if provoked. The iron-gray sky revealed the barren expanse of Antarctica during the winter of 2014. This land of snow and ice was unspoiled by a time when only the most resilient creatures survived. This was the southernmost continent, where life barely survived on the brink of a frozen planet. Beyond the surface, predators hid from the bitter cold of the Southern Ocean, which lapped at massive icebergs. Adventurers were drawn to the dangerously beautiful but harsh landscape. One such adventurer was Roddy Stavanger, an experienced kayaker who had ventured into these hostile waters independently. Roddy was accustomed to the harshness of the natural world. Throughout his journey, he had crossed some of the planet's most inaccessible and harsh terrain. He had spent years organizing his trip to Antarctica. He dreamed of traveling through the icy wilderness and taking in nature's pristine beauty and solitary force in one of the world's last unexplored regions. However, the peace that pervaded the ice-covered terrain was deceiving because peril was nearby. On this specific day, Roddy was sailing the frigid waters of the Weddell Sea, dodging massive icebergs and floes that bobbed idly in the waves. The crisp air condensed his breath into cold clouds. The untainted splendor around him, from the angular peaks of far-off glaciers to the sporadic glimpses of penguins plunging through the ice and into the water, astounded him. However, the leopard seal was a much more powerful creature, and the real monarch of these waters. With sleek bodies and strong jaws, leopard seals were the top predators. They were known to hunt penguins, fish, and even other seals. Despite their reputation, Roddy had yet to expect to encounter one so close to his kayak. As he paddled, the water around him seemed calm, too calm. The deep blue surface was like a mirror reflecting the gloomy sky above. Without warning, the surface of the water exploded. Before Roddy could respond, a huge shape rushed upward and struck the bow of his kayak with such force that it knocked him unconscious. As he was hurled into the air and his body crashed into the icy water, his heart leaped into his throat. The cold shocked his system, hitting him like a sledgehammer. He gasped as the chilling southern ocean grabbed hold of him. Lost and disoriented, Roddy struggled to stay afloat, thrashing his hands in an attempt to grasp the capsized kayak. His body began to twitch with panic, but then his adventurous instincts took over. The key to survival was remaining composed, but that was harder said than done when the icy water drained his energy. He was aware that hypothermia would strike in a matter of minutes. Roddy struggled to move his kayak when he noticed a dark shape moving slightly beneath the surface. His blood was icy, even more so than the water. The leopard seal was back. It moved in a terrifyingly graceful circle beneath him like a ghostly shadow in the abyss. He knew the creature was evaluating him to determine if he was hunting or encroaching on its territory. As Roddy tried to decide what to do next, his mind raced. Although these instances were uncommon, he knew leopard seals occasionally attacked people. However, he was alone in the Antarctic waters and could not depend on anyone but himself. The radio he brought was now submerged and useless, and the nearest research station was miles away. Once more, the seal struck from below. It crashed into the kayak's underbelly, toppling it and plunging Roddy beneath the surface. He struggled to surface again, his lungs burning. Due to the cold's effects, he moved less quickly and with less coordination. Although his heavy, dry suit offered some protection, it wouldn't be sufficient to save him if he couldn't exit the water quickly. Undaunted, the leopard seal circled back for a second strike. It passed by Roddy, its eyes dark and menacing, and Roddy saw its sleek, spotted body. He understood fighting back was out of the question and couldn't outswim it. His survival hinged on his ability to think quickly. In a desperate attempt to calm himself, Roddy recalled something he had read about leopard seals: superior intelligence and a tendency toward curiosity despite their aggressive nature. He could make himself look less like prey and more like something the seal was confused about, making it lose interest. Roddy reached for the paddle floating next to him with numb fingers. He held it before him to trick the seal and waved it wildly in the water. The seal paused its head momentarily, breaking the surface just a few feet away from him. It observed him with unblinking dark eyes. Roddy's heart pounded as he continued to wave the paddle, hoping against hope that his plan would work. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the leopard seal dove beneath the surface and disappeared into the depths. Roddy waited, his muscles tense, expecting another attack. But the water remained still. The predator was no longer interested. It quietly retreated. Roddy was shivering violently, knowing he was running out of time. His hands were practically too numb to work with, and the cold was seeping into his bones. He hauled himself onto the kayak and flipped it over with great effort. Even though he was freezing wet and worn out, he was still alive. With his remaining strength, Roddy paddled toward a small ice floe. As he ascended onto it, he collapsed into a heap, his body trembling from the cold. Hours later, a research vessel patrolling the area spotted him, a lone figure huddled on the ice. They pulled him aboard, and as he warmed up in the ship's cabin, Roddy realized just how close he had come to death. The encounter with the leopard seal would stay with him for the rest of his life, a reminder that in Antarctica, even the most experienced adventurers were at the mercy of nature's fiercest predators. He knew he had to get warm, but was now safe from the leopard seal.